Today I'm making a batch of cold porcelain. This is an air dry clay that you can make yourself at home with some pretty simple ingredients. The recipe that I'm using is from Sugar Cafe Charms, who is another YouTuber. I'll link to her video down in the description box, but the recipe is pretty simple. It's 1 cup of cornstarch, 1 cup of PVA glue, 2 tablespoons of vinegar, 2 tablespoons of colorless oil like baby oil, and 1 tablespoon of acrylic paint. That's if you want to add color to your batch of clay. I didn't want to have a color to start with because I like that it's sort of translucent, so I omitted that part. First, you add in all of your wet ingredients to a microwave-safe bowl, and then you add in the cornstarch, and you mix it all together until it's kind of like this glaze icing consistency. And then comes the somewhat anxiety-inducing part, which is that you have to put it in the microwave for a series of short little bursts and stir it up between each microwave. I microwaved the dough for 20 seconds, then stirred it up, and I did that 4 times. And then I did 10 seconds, stirred, 10 seconds, stirred, and then it was finally ready to start kneading. I'm not gonna lie to you, the kneading part is extremely messy because this stuff is super sticky when you first start working with it. I'm really happy that I used a different work surface when I started it because it was gonna be even harder to clean up if I had just done it directly onto my desk. But after you've kneaded it for about 5 minutes, it stops being sticky and it starts to be a little bit stiff and kind of hard to actually knead any longer, and then that's when it's done. There's also a test where you can pull it apart, and if it forms teardrops or stiff points from each side of the tear, then it's good to go and you know you're finished kneading it. Once I was done, I put it in a Ziploc bag and then put it in an airtight container, and I left it to sit overnight. But now it's ready to use. Today I'm making a cozy little breakfast because I wanted to get some practice making foods, and I wanted to test out using this cold porcelain because my project that I've been working on for the past few weeks is actually in the fantasy series I'm doing, and it's a king's feast table, but I severely underestimated how much stuff is on the table, and it's been taking a lot longer to finish than I was expecting. In the meantime, I wanted to continue getting out videos for you guys, but also I wanted to get some practice using this cold porcelain and making little foods and try to see if there was a way I can do it that I don't have to go out and buy any clay, because sometimes it's hard to get my hands on the clay and it's a lot better if I could just make it myself. I'm making a tiny table and chairs to go in the room box that I made in the previous video, and I am just making a little farmhouse table and farm chairs to go with it. They're not going to be the main focus of the build actually, but I needed somewhere for the plates to sit. After starting working on the table, I realized the legs were too long, so I'm just going to trim them off with some scissors. And the legs are made using some balsa wood, which is a lot softer than the basswood I normally work with. But I don't actually like balsa wood because I feel like it's too fuzzy and doesn't really remind me of actual wood in the real world. I'm making the chairs out of paperboard instead of wood like I normally do, and I wanted to see if after I painted them they looked very cardboardy, or if I could get away with doing this instead of using the wood, because bending the back of this chair using paperboard is going to be a lot easier than soaking the wood and bending it and letting it dry. I cut some tiny strips, and these are going to be the spokes for the back of the chair, and then I doubled up on the thickness of this paperboard because I felt like it was a little bit too thin in the beginning. I sanded it down and got it all smooth, and then bended it into the shape of the back of the chair and added the little wooden rods to it using some PVA glue. After the table and chairs were complete, I added some wood stain to them using some brown acrylic paint mixed with this Make It Stain paint that Deco Art makes that I've been talking about for the past few videos and I really love. It just turns normal acrylic paint into wood stain and I really like this stuff a lot. I put it on pretty thick this time since some of the parts of the wood were actually going to be paperboard and not wood at all, and then I left those to dry. The clay has been resting overnight, so now it's ready to use. I tried to find an exact scientific reason online for why it needed to rest overnight, and the closest I could get to anybody having an explanation was just that it causes it to like combine a little bit better if it has time to rest. If anybody actually knows why that is, that would be great if you leave it down in the comments, but as far as I can tell, you just have to do this step if you want it to turn out better. I use acrylic paints to color the clay itself, and then for any details like the crispiness around the edges of these fried eggs, I'm using some chalk pastels and just brushing it lightly onto the eggs, and then I use some UV resin to give them a glossy finish. I'm figuring out how to work with this cold porcelain as I go along because I'm a beginner to using this stuff, and so far I don't know like the best practices that other people have found, but I think using a little piece of silicone is really nice to be able to press it down and get it to be really smooth. And then I'm mostly starting with one base color that's closest to the main color of the food that I'm trying to make, and then using the pastel or paint to go in and add the details. I'm sculpting each of these little pieces of food and texturing them and painting them directly as I go along, but this clay is also really great for using a mold with. So this is definitely going to come in handy on the next project that I'm working on with the entire table full of food, because there's going to be multiple pieces of bread and multiple vegetables and little dishes that I'm going to have to recreate. So being able to just make a mold of the one thing and then pump out like 6 or 7 of them is going to be helpful. It typically takes about a day or two for the cold porcelain clay to dry, and it shrinks 10 to 15% according to the internet. But at this scale, I didn't really notice that. I'm making some bowls and plates out of plastic sheet, and I'm using a little bit of green stuff to go around the edges so that I can smooth it, because I'm going to be using my homemade vacuum former to make the bowls and plates. I made this vacuum forming device a while ago. It's basically just a box with a lot of holes in the top that I stick my vacuum end into and then suck all the air out. And once I've heated up these plastic sheets, they will just suction over any little mold that I have on top of the vacuum former. And I really like it for making plates and dishes and cups and things like that, because sometimes if I sculpt them out of something like polymer clay, they end up being a little bit too chunky. Now I can go ahead and plate up the breakfast. We've got our 2 eggs and our breakfast ham and our toast. And I'm going to put this UV resin mixed with yellow paint into this pitcher for some orange juice. I'm going to do the same technique to make the coffee, but instead of using yellow paint, I just used brown. And I'm curing it with an ultraviolet flashlight. All right, everything is ready to go. Time to put together this little scene. I want to say a huge shout out to my patrons: Inez E, KNZ, Grouchy Old Man, Fatal Gift Pat, Emasuki T, Lizzie B, Ryan R, Show R, Julia S, Fred C, Isaac W, Lori R, Cheryl F, Gabriel K, and Awkward Burb. If you want to support the channel or find any of the patterns that I create, I post them on Patreon. You can head over there, the link's in the description box. And I will see you guys in the next video, which will hopefully be the Fantasy Kings Banquet. So I'll see you next week. Bye!